I knew I should have walked out of that meeting the second my boss slid the folder across the table and said, "You'll take this, right? I trust you." It wasn't a folder, really. It was a brick. 2 years of half-finished work, unanswered client questions, red numbers someone had tried to hide by changing the color to gray, and a roadmap that looked like it had been thrown together by a sleep-deprived intern. I remember lifting it and feeling the weight, literal and not. And while I stood there processing it, my boss, Andrew, was already half out of the room, typing something on his phone like this entire project was just a minor inconvenience he delegated to an intern. He wasn't always like that. When I joined the company 2 years earlier, he came across as one of those young and sharp managers, big vocabulary, bigger confidence. He knew how to talk to upper management and how to disappear whenever actual work showed up. He wasn't cruel, not in the obvious way. He just treated responsibility like something optional, something elastic he could stretch over the nearest person. That day, that person was me. He didn't even stay to explain. "Client's unhappy. Fix it," he said, and before I could ask how bad it was, the conference room door clicked shut behind him. I sat alone at the table, flipping through the documents. Every page was worse than the previous one. Deliverables overdue by months. Dependencies approved but never started. Risk logs empty, even though the product was practically held together with tape. Someone had even signed off on a milestone that wasn't even delivered. Not partially, not conceptually. It just didn't exist. What unsettled me wasn't the disaster itself. It was the fact that Andrew had clearly known about it long before dumping it on my desk. That became even clearer 3 hours later when I went to his office and found his desk clean. No notes, no laptop, no jacket, just a single printed email taped to the monitor. "Oh, urgent personal leave." The timestamp was from that morning, meaning he'd planned this, meaning the project hadn't been dumped on me. It had been planted. I'm not a confrontational person. I don't throw scenes. I don't slam doors. I don't send emails written in the heat of the moment. But something about that situation felt wrong enough that I walked straight to HR. Not to complain, just to get clarity. To make sure I wasn't signing up for something that would sink my career. The HR rep, a woman named Melissa, didn't even look at me when I came in. She was scrolling through something on her laptop with the dead expression of someone grading homework. "Andrew reassigned the project to me," I said, carefully placing the folder on the desk. "But he didn't leave any context. I'm not sure why it's suddenly mine or how it's been handled so far." She barely blinked. "Yes, it's reassigned." "Okay, but why? I'm not a PM and this seems—" "It's business critical," she interrupted. "And Andrew's on leave, temporarily. The project needed an owner." "Right," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But this isn't a new project. It's a mess. And I don't know what's been done, what hasn't, what the client expects." She cut me off again. "It's your burden now." She said it flat, without emotion, as if she were reading the weather, as if I had asked her to describe the color of the carpet. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard. "My burden?" I repeated. "Your responsibility," she corrected with a shrug. "Same thing." I laughed under my breath, not because any of this was funny, but because of the absurdity, the complete lack of hesitation in her voice. It wasn't personal. It wasn't malicious. It was worse. It was routine. A muscle memory response of a system that operated by finding the quietest person in the room and loading them up until they broke or quit. I walked back to my desk with the folder under my arm, feeling the office air buzzing around me, keyboards clacking, conversations humming, printers churning, everyone busy with their own fires, their own deadlines, their own private frustrations. Nobody knew that a whole collapsing project had just been handed to me like a cursed heirloom. I sat down, opened the first page again, and made myself read through the entire thing slowly. No panic, no anger, just observation. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with, not emotionally, structurally. By the time the office lights dimmed for evening mode, I realized three important things. First, the client had been raising concerns for months, escalating repeatedly, each time receiving vague promises and adjusted outlooks from Andrew. Second, there were entire components marked completed that existed only as slides in a presentation. No code, no documentation, nothing. Third, my name was not mentioned anywhere, not once, not in planning notes, not in early communication, not in problem escalation threads, meaning the project was never mine, never intended to be mine, until today. At 7:50 p.m., the cleaning crew entered the office. I was still there, staring at a spreadsheet that didn't add up no matter how I sliced it. I felt the weight of the assignment pressing down on me, not as fear, but as clarity. They wanted me to absorb the blame silently, to take the fall if the client pulled the plug, to be the person whose reputation cushioned the impact. I'm not a hero. I'm not a whistleblower. And I'm definitely not the type to flip tables and storm out. But I'm also not stupid. I closed the folder, placed it neatly beside my keyboard, and opened a blank document. Not to complain, not to accuse, to document. If they wanted me to carry this thing, I was going to make damn sure there was a trail showing exactly how it landed in my hands. The office was almost empty when I finally stood up. My shoulders were stiff, my eyes tired, but my thoughts were sharp, sharper than they'd been in a long time. They thought they gave me a burden. I picked it up, nodded politely, and walked back to my desk. But I wasn't planning on carrying it alone. The next morning, I came in an hour earlier than usual. Not because I suddenly wanted to be a hero, but because I needed quiet. Real quiet. The kind you only get when the office is still half asleep, and the coffee machines are the loudest thing in the building. I made a fresh copy of the folder, put the original in my drawer, and opened my laptop. First thing I did was pull every email thread with the client's domain, then every internal thread where the project codename was mentioned, then the Jira board Andrew had conveniently forgotten to add me to. By 8:30 a.m., I already understood more about the project than Andrew had ever bothered to share with anyone on our team. It wasn't just behind schedule. It had been red flagged 3 times by the client, once by our own finance department, and temporarily downgraded to amber in the system by Andrew. The justification line in the risk log was almost funny. Client perception manageable. Communication plan in place. I scrolled down to see this. Communication plan. It was 3 bullet points. Weekly sync with client sponsor. Monthly update to execs. Internal follow-up as needed. Nothing about scope. Nothing about the fact that requirements had changed twice, and nobody had adjusted resources. Nothing about the part where Andrew had promised to feature our platform literally couldn't deliver without a custom build. The more I read, the more a very specific feeling settled in my chest. Not panic. Not even anger. Irritation. The kind of slow, grinding irritation you get when you see, in black and white, how someone has been winging it for months while smiling in every meeting and saying, "We're on track." At 9:15, my teammate Sarah dropped her bag on the desk opposite mine and glanced at the pile of papers. "Whoa, you get promoted or punished?" she asked. "Still figuring that out," I said. She hesitated. "Is that Project Atlas?" "Yeah." She let out a low whistle. "He stuck you with Atlas. I thought that thing was basically radioactive." That word, radioactive, told me a lot. "You knew it was bad?" I asked. "Everyone knows it's bad," she said, lowering her voice. "We just don't say it out loud. Andrew freaks if anyone uses the word delay in front of him. He keeps saying phased value delivery instead." I stared at her for a second. Why didn't anyone escalate? She gave me one of those tired office smiles that say more than words. "Who do you think they'd listen to? The guy presenting pretty slides to the execs every month, or the people buried in tickets?" she said. "Besides, he keeps telling everyone the client is demanding and unrealistic." It's easier to believe that than admit we screwed up. That was when I realized this wasn't just about Andrew. It was about a culture that rewarded whoever looked calmest in front of a PowerPoint. But that was just the beginning. At 10 Hawaii a.m., my calendar pinged. Atlas Weekly, client sync. I hadn't been invited originally. I added myself. 5 minutes before the call, I walked over to Melissa's office. She was typing, as always. Just to confirm, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I'm the official owner for Atlas now. Yes, she said without looking up. In writing? I asked. She finally glanced at me, annoyed. Andrew submitted a reassignment form. It's logged in the system. Can you send me a copy? I said. I want to make sure I don't miss any of the expectations stated there. That word, expectations, did something. She paused, clicked a few times, then said, Fine, I'll forward you the HR record. An email hit my inbox 30 seconds later. I opened it. There it was, a one-page form. Temporary project ownership transfer due to personal leave. Reason, family emergency. Scope, operational execution and client communication. I read that last line twice. Operational execution and client communication was vague enough to mean, if this explodes, it's on you. I replied with a single sentence. Received, thanks. I'll make sure to reflect the existing timelines and prior commitments accurately in all communications, so expectations remain aligned. Polite, harmless, but specific enough that if anyone ever dug into the thread, it would be clear I didn't agree to magic my way out of a hole. At 10 taps on the dot, I joined the Atlas call. The client side had 4 people, their project manager, their tech lead, a finance rep, and someone with VP in their title who joined with camera off and silence that immediately raised the temperature in the room. On our side, it was me, Sarah, and one of the architects. Andrew was optional and didn't join, of course. Good morning, the client PM said. I see we have some new faces. I unmuted. Hi, this is my name. I'll be taking over day-to-day coordination for Atlas. While Andrew is on leave, there was a pause on their side. On leave, the VP repeated slowly. Convenient timing. Nobody laughed. I shared my screen and pulled up the timeline Andrew had been showing them. I'd seen the slide deck in the folder, all smooth gradients and confident bullet points. On the surface, it looked fine. Underneath, it was fiction. Before we go through updates, I said, I'd like to confirm that what we have in our internal system matches your understanding. I spent the last day reviewing everything. The PM folded her arms. Please do. I went line by line through the milestones. For each one, I had added 2 columns. Promised and delivered. Sometimes the boxes were both green. More often, the promised box was green, and the delivered box was blank. I didn't editorialize. I didn't excuse. I just read out dates. Phase 2. Integration promised, October 14th. Delivered, not complete. Current status. 60% functionality, Lev in staging only. Data migration batch 1. Promised November 30th. Delivered, partially completed, with manual workarounds in use. Reporting suite. Promised January 15th. Delivered, not started. No tickets opened. Every time I said not started, I could feel the silence on their end tighten. Finally, the VP spoke. Is this the first time you're looking at this? Or the first time you're telling us? He asked. The first time I've had full access to the materials, I said. I joined the project yesterday. I wanted to make sure we were all working from the same reality. I chose that word carefully. Reality. On the company chat, a message from Sarah popped up. Dude, you're really doing this. I ignored it. The client PM exhaled, long and slow. We knew things were behind, she said. We did not realize how far behind. Andrew kept telling us you were refining delivery and avoiding technical debt. I didn't throw him under the bus. I didn't need to. His emails were already there in their inboxes. I can't speak for what's been said before, I replied. What I can do is show you exactly where we are, what's realistically possible in the next 8 weeks, and what trade-offs that requires. But I can't promise that everything on this original slide will magically exist by the original date. That's not feasible with the current resources. There was a long pause, and then, unexpectedly, the tech lead on their side nodded. "Finally," he said, "someone's speaking plain English." It wasn't applause. It wasn't victory. But something in the air shifted. For the first time since that folder landed on my desk, I felt a small click of alignment, like a door that had been stuck for months, finally moved half an inch. After the call, I got 3 separate emails from the client, one from the PM. "Thank you for the honest breakdown. Can we schedule a working session to replan?" One from the tech lead. "If you send me your internal Jira IDs, I'll map them to our backlog so we stop talking past each other." And one from the VP. "Please include me in future status updates. I want visibility on the new plan." I also got one email from Melissa in HR. "Reminder, all external communication must be aligned with existing commitments. Please avoid language that might suggest the company misrepresented timelines." I stared at that sentence for a long time. I realized something then. They didn't just want me to fix the project. They wanted me to fix it quietly. That night, I didn't stay late. I went home on time, cooked myself something simple, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, building 2 parallel documents. One was a realistic recovery plan. The other was a factual timeline of who knew what and when. They thought they'd handed me a mess to clean up. What they didn't realize yet was that, by making me the owner, they'd also given me the clearest view of how it all went wrong. By the 3rd week, the chaos was no longer creeping in. It was already sitting at my desk before I even arrived. The moment I logged in each morning, I'd find a half-dozen messages from the client, 3 from finance asking why forecast numbers didn't match Andrew's old projections, and at least one from HR subtly reminding me to maintain alignment with past commitments, which was corporate code for "don't make us look bad." The only person I didn't hear from was Andrew. Not once. Not a message. Not a forwarded email. Not even a passive-aggressive Slack emoji reaction. He had vanished like someone who knew exactly what was coming. But I knew he was watching. His corporate calendar was still active. I could see status flicker from busy to in a meeting, even when he wasn't physically present. He wasn't gone. He was hiding behind the shield of personal leave, waiting for me to fail loudly enough that he could return and frame himself as the returning savior. The company had seen people try that tactic before, just not with someone as patient as me on the receiving end. The breaking point began on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in a conference room with 2 other project specialists going through the dependency matrix when we stumbled on something so absurd it almost felt staged. 2 milestones, both marked completed, depended on a component that didn't exist anywhere in the codebase, not even as a stub. "It says here, Andrew approved this in August," one of the specialists said, scrolling through Confluence. "But the ticket for it was never assigned. It's literally marked as idea backlog." The other frowned. "But he reported progress on this to the directors in the Q3 presentation." I pulled up the slides. There it was, clean and confident. A neat green checkmark next to Data Harmonization Layer, a feature that had never been started. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. "So he knew," I murmured. "Knew what?" they both asked. "That the platform wasn't capable of supporting Phase 3, I said, "and he didn't tell the client, or anyone." We sat in silence for a moment. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind that comes when people start realizing they've been walking on a collapsing bridge. "This is bad," one of them finally said. I didn't respond. I reopened my timeline document and added another entry. August. Milestone marked complete, despite no associated work logged. No tickets, no PRs, no design docs. It was one of those small details that mattered later. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was traceable. By Friday, I had uncovered enough discrepancies to understand the full picture. Andrew hadn't mismanaged the project. He had concealed it, massaged numbers, shifted dates quietly, replaced real progress metrics with vanity KPIs, ignored client risks. And when everything finally caught up to him, he handed the whole thing to the person least likely to cause a scene. Me. But that realization didn't bring relief, because on Monday morning I walked into a situation deliberately engineered to make me carry the blame. At 9:02 a.m., I received a meeting invite titled Atlas Status Review. Executive Visibility Required. Attendees: 2 directors, finance lead, HR, legal, and me. And in the description, objective: clarify ownership gaps and understand delivery failures. The word failures jumped off the screen. Nobody had asked me for context before scheduling that call. Nobody had spoken to my team. Nobody had reached out to Andrew, or if they had, he had deflected everything to my temporary replacement. It was a setup, the kind carefully crafted by people who want to say afterwards, "Well, we tried to support him." The meeting was in 2 hours. I spent both preparing. I didn't write a defense speech. I didn't rehearse excuses. I simply organized the timeline I'd been building since day one. The one consisting only of facts, dates, emails, tickets, and system logs. No emotion, no commentary. Numbers are funny like that. They don't need help telling the truth. At 11 a.m., I walked into one of the glass conference rooms where careers quietly died. The directors looked stressed. Finance looked irritated. HR smiled the way people smile at funerals when they're not sure whether it's appropriate to look sad. "Thanks for joining. My name," one of the directors began. "We need to understand what exactly happened with Atlas." I nodded. "Happy to walk through the project status." I prepared a consolidated timeline. HR shifted in her seat. She hadn't expected that. "Before we dive in," the other director said, "we want clarity on when you took ownership." 3 weeks ago, I said. "I have the HR reassignment form here." I slid a printed copy across the table. Melissa from HR cleared her throat. The transition was necessary due to operational needs. "Of course," I said, "and I've been documenting everything since. If it's all right, I'll start with the earliest traceable discrepancy. That should give us a factual baseline." They gestured for me to proceed. I connected my laptop to the screen. A simple table appeared. Columns: date, event reported, status. Actual status SOAR, evidence. Row by row, I walked them through it. The slides Andrew had shown, the milestones he'd marked complete, the sprint commitments he never staffed, the client escalations he minimized in summaries, the feature promises that had no engineering approval, the risks he downgraded without review. I didn't say a single sentence that wasn't supported by a timestamp or document. No one interrupted me for the first 10 minutes. At the 15-minute mark, the finance lead stopped me. "Hold on. You're saying revenue forecasts were based on deliverables that didn't exist yet?" I turned to him. "Based on the documentation, yes." The room went quiet. At 20 minutes, a director leaned forward, looking genuinely pale. "Why weren't we made aware of these gaps earlier?" I chose my words carefully. "I can only speak for the period I've been involved," I said. "All prior reports were submitted by Andrew." A muscle twitched in Melissa's jaw. At 25 minutes, the second director spoke, voice tight. "Where was your manager during this period?" And just like that, the meeting's center of gravity shifted. It wasn't subtle. It was visible. The moment a group realizes they've been looking at the wrong target. I had not blamed Andrew. I had not named him as negligent. I had not even implied malice. I had simply shown them numbers. But numbers were enough. After the review, they asked me to leave the room for 10 minutes. I waited in the hallway, staring at the carpet, listening to muffled voices rising inside. When they called me back in, the tone was entirely different. "Thank you for the transparency," one director said. "We'll be opening a formal internal investigation into Atlas's prior management." HR's smile had vanished completely. Finance asked me to send them my timeline for audit purposes. Legal requested access to the client communication logs. And then, almost as an afterthought, the director added, "In the meantime, my name, you will continue leading Atlas. We trust your approach." I nodded, but inside, something had already clicked into place. They didn't trust me. They trusted the documentation. That was enough. I left the meeting drained but steady. For the first time, the weight on my shoulders wasn't just a burden. It was leverage. Leverage built from discipline, not emotion. As I walked back to my desk, my phone buzzed with a notification. A single-line message from an unfamiliar number. "We need to talk about Andrew." They thought I was gone. I wasn't, and I was done cleaning things quietly. The message, "We need to talk about Andrew," came from a senior program manager named Victor. We'd crossed paths only a few times before. He oversaw compliance on big accounts, the kind of person who knew every escalation pipeline by heart. He wasn't dramatic, not political, not someone who inserted himself into situations unless there was a reason. That alone told me things had moved faster than I expected. We met in a small side conference room with frosted glass walls. Victor brought a laptop, a notebook, and the kind of calm expression people wear when they already know 90% of the story. "I'll be direct," he said. "Your documentation helped us identify several inconsistencies in earlier reports. We've been reviewing Andrew's submissions for the past year." I didn't interrupt. He wasn't here for commentary. Some of these discrepancies were small, others not small. He tapped the notebook. Unlogged scope changes, risk downgrades without sign-off, forecast updates that didn't match the engineering data, and a pattern of reporting completion on deliverables with no supporting artifacts. I nodded. That aligned exactly with what I'd found. "And most importantly," he continued, "there are communications with the client, promising functionality outside the agreed scope. No approvals, no architecture review, nothing." That was the smoking gun. In any company, promising work the product can't deliver is more than recklessness. It's contractual risk. "What happens now?" I asked. "The investigation moves to the executive team," Victor said. "Andrew will be placed on administrative review effective immediately." A quiet, factual phrasing. But in corporate language, administrative review was the step before one of two outcomes: resignation or termination with cause. He closed the notebook. "We also need to talk about you." I kept my posture neutral. "You were put in an impossible situation," he said, "and you handled it without panic, without accusing anyone prematurely, and with verifiable evidence. That's rare." I didn't say anything. Praise wasn't the point. "There's an opportunity here," he continued. "Once the transition is complete, we'd like you to take formal ownership of Atlas. Title adjustment, compensation correction, decision authority. Alternatively, if you don't want to inherit this account long term, we can place you as project lead on a new initiative with a clean slate." A month ago, I wouldn't have believed the offer. Now it felt like the natural end of a chain reaction I hadn't started, but had refused to be crushed by. "I'd like something stable," I said, "and transparent. I don't want to walk into another situation where information is hidden." "That's exactly why we want you," he said. Andrew returned to the office 2 days later, not with swagger, with caution. He looked thinner, tired, the kind of tired that comes from realizing the walls you leaned on weren't as solid as you thought. He didn't come to my desk. He didn't send a message. Instead, he walked straight to the HR's suite and closed the door behind him. People whispered naturally, but nobody knew the details. That's how real consequences work. Quietly, professionally, with paperwork, not spectacle. By Friday, his calendar was empty. His profile picture disappeared from Slack. A short, internal memo went out. "Andrew M. will be moving on from the company. We thank him for his contributions." Nothing more, nothing less. His era of pretty slides and half-truths was over. The client's reaction surprised me most. When we presented the revised plan, realistic timelines, reduced scope, clear dependencies, they didn't complain. They didn't threaten to leave. They actually breathed easier. "This is the first version of this project that looks real," their VP said. "Let's do it." Trust, they showed me, wasn't about perfection. It was about honesty. In the weeks that followed, the noise around Atlas quieted. Meetings became productive instead of defensive. The team stopped bracing for unpredictable last-minute directives and started planning based on actual capacity. The engineering lead thanked me personally for removing the fog. Finance rebuilt their models with correct dates. Legal revised the contract, this time with signatures from every necessary department. The chaos dissolved because someone had finally flipped on the lights. One afternoon, after a particularly smooth working session, I stayed a few minutes in the empty conference room and looked at the whiteboard. No lies, no impossible promises, no green check marks painted over nothing, just real work. And for the first time since that folder hit my desk, I felt something unexpected. Peace, not triumph, not revenge, just peace. Because none of this happened through theatrics or shouting or dramatic speeches. It happened because I refused to play the role they assumed I would, the silent absorber, the convenient shield, the person who takes responsibilities without asking questions. Instead, I asked every question, documented every gap, clarified every truth, not to destroy anyone, but to protect myself. And in doing so, the truth destroyed what needed to be destroyed on its own. On a quiet Friday evening after the office emptied, I sat at my desk and looked at the same spot where that cursed folder had once landed. Now there was no weight, no dread, just a clean surface and a new title on my badge. I closed my laptop, turned off my monitor, and felt a rare, complete sense of closure. Everyone had seen exactly who put the holes in the ship, and who'd finally steered it straight. The story didn't end with drama. It ended with clarity, and clarity was all I ever needed.